Okay, so thank you for coming. First of all, I have to apologize for my English, but I've checked it with Jennifer and she can understand me, so the most difficult part is done. We are here for the fourth time, I think, even if for Jennifer it is the first time in Perugia, to present something related to the concept of slow journalism and the slow media and slow news. And we have to be quickly slow today because we have just an hour, but if you want, then we can have something to drink in a slowly way after this panel. We are here to present Jennifer Rauch's Slow Media, and also the Italian little brother, which this is a Slow Media by Jennifer, and this is the Italian brother Slow Journalism by Daniele Nalbone and myself. And I'd like to let Jennifer talk a lot today because she has to explain us why slow is satisfying, sustainable, and smart.
Oh, thank you, Alberto. So yeah, I'm not going to talk a lot today. I just want to give a brief introduction to some of these ideas. And then I'm interested in conversing with Alberto a little bit because he's somebody who actually practices slow news and slow journalism in addition to writing about it and researching it like I do. So as he said, I'm writing about the idea of why slow is satisfying, sustainable, and smart, both from the point of view of the journalists, the people who produce the news, and the consumers. That nowadays a lot of journalists are stressed out. They're frustrated that their work isn't satisfying because they're just producing a lot of clickbait and working in these, in a lot of cases, corporate and commercial structures. It's not sustainable, the pace of the work, churning out to 10 stories a day. And it just doesn't seem smart. From the reader's side or the viewer's side in some cases, it's very similar that we talk a lot about news fatigue, that even people who care about the news just, can't keep up with the quantity of it, so that there's an interest in having more quality and less quantity. The main thing I'm going to focus on is what we can learn, obviously, from the slow food revolution, and how we can maybe learn some things from the experience of the slow food movement that can help us improve journalism and especially find ways of sustaining these kind of projects in the current business environment. For me, the slow media started with this realization that I thought I was having, this big discovery like, oh, there should be a slow food movement, but for media. So I started looking into it and trying to discover if such a thing was happening, if anybody else was talking about it. And I was very excited to find out that dozens, if not hundreds of people have been out there saying there should be a slow media movement. Why isn't there a slow media movement? And for a long time, it was people talking about this idea hypothetically. Over time, it's grown, and now people, in many countries on several continents have started actually putting a lot of ideas into practice. I discovered, much to my delight, that a colleague of mine named Peter Laufer, who is a Polk Award-winning journalist and investigative international reporter, wrote this book called Slow News a few years ago. I, of course, wrote Slow Media, and then more recently I made the acquaintance of Alberto, who's writing about slow journalism. So we've all been coming at it from different angles, with Peter writing about what it means from the consumer as a critical news reader to have these kinds of sources available. I'm talking about sustainability in a wide range of things, meaning not only sustainability of journalism as an enterprise, sustainability of the life of a reporter, sustainability of society, and also of the environment, and how journalism and media projects can contribute to that. Some of our other colleagues who are actually putting these ideas into practice are delayed gratification, which I love because it's produced by the Slow Journalism Company in London, if you don't know about it. And they really have this terrific philosophy of being the last to break news, saying that we don't need to chase all of the shiny objects. We don't, as reporters, as consumers, we don't necessarily need to know what happens every single day. We need a more comprehensive view of the world. And what they do is they produce a publication once per quarter that looks at what happened in the previous quarter, so that with benefit of hindsight, they can say, okay, what happened 3 months ago that really matters, and follow up on a story and not just tell us, oh, there was an earthquake in Aquila today, but 3 months later, what's happening in Aquila, or a year later, and follow up on stories that kind of, flash in the public and the press's eye, and then in a lot of cases seem to disappear. They've been at it for 9 years now. And then, we also have experiments happening like The Correspondent, which, as many of you know, is spreading to the US and to the English-speaking world, as well as Tortoise, that a lot of people are taking up these mantles, and they may or may not call themselves slow, but they're embodying all of the values that I'm going to talk about in a minute. And then a lot of you may have also seen this article more recently in Neiman Lab, or gone to a lot of the sessions that we've had here this week that have been really exciting for me, with people from The Correspondent, as well as Zetland and other projects who are talking about what they're doing and how well it's working. When I use the word slow media, I'm really kind of using it as an umbrella to talk about slow news and slow journalism, but also a host of other things, that there's a slow cinema movement, slow blogging, slow books, or slow reading. If you go to the Wikipedia page, you can see that a lot of people are taking this similar framework of ideas, mainly influenced by the success of slow food, and thinking about how it can improve all these different realms of our information environment. As my subtitle makes clear, when we talk about slow, we're not really just talking about speed. We're not talking about doing everything slowly, because that would be incredibly boring, It's not that slow is, the ultimate and everything should be slow, but it's that slow and fast need to work together, that, there's il tempo giusto, right? The different things call for different speeds, and that we need to be able to alternate wisely between them. So, rather than saying that slow is about the top of the list there being sluggish, being lazy, indolent, slothful, it's about these other synonyms, about doing things deliberately, mindfully, if you like, intentionally, thoughtfully. Here's a pop quiz. I'm a teacher, so I like to get a lot of audience participation going. Does anybody know who this gentleman is? Raise of hands. Oh, not too bad. I ask this question a lot in the US, and people frequently don't know who he is. In Italy, I would expect more people to be familiar with Carlo Petrini, the founder of the slow food movement, or one of them, rather. But he's their most visible face and kind of spokesperson. And of course, he's a former journalist from Radio Bra back in the 70s. And a lot of people enjoy the fruits of slow food. They eat slow food. They, go to farm-to-table restaurants and, eat artisanal everything. But they don't necessarily know that there was an organization behind it from Italy, and that there was a group of people who wrote books and kind of had theories and did a lot of thinking about how to make this movement successful, about how to get consumers on board and educate them about what slow food is and why it matters. If you think about in the 70s or the 80s, organic meant nothing to people. A lot of people thought it was sort of hippie, sort of, silly, mystical thinking. Even once people started seeing the value in it, they weren't necessarily ready to spend more on it. And obviously that's going to be a factor in journalism to sustain these projects. We have to make the case to people that slow news is worth paying for. Of course, he's been incredibly successful in this, that, his idea and other people in slow food is that slow food is against industrialization. A lot of it arose out of McDonald's and sort of standardization about global corporate motives for, setting up values and processes in the food system, which, of course, we see a lot of parallels in the current news system and the problems that we're having today. What I really like about him, too, is that he sees the collective angle in things. So it's not about the individual journalist or news organization or reader and their ability to do quality work. But it's about, just looking at the titles of his books, it's about the nation, it's about a revolution, it's about a slow food movement and networks. So it's about setting up sort of collective structures of people who are working together to create an alternate system that promotes values and principles. And of course, it's been incredibly successful. 30 years just about now, and they have 1 million supporters around the world. Again, people who sort of formally recognize themselves as supporters as opposed to doing it kind of informally. All of these food communities and special localized organizations and networks that help bring people together. So of course the question is, what does all of this have to do with news? How can we use these ideas in journalism? And if you read all of his books, which probably most of you haven't, but I've tried to, they're kind of theoretically dense. I mean, they're fairly accessible to people, but I'm giving you the slideshow here so that you don't need to read them unless you're really motivated to do so. Some of the ideas behind slow food, first of all, are provenance, that we know where our food comes from, we know who's making it, and where, and why, and how. One of the common ideas is know your farmer. So that raises the question, like, what would it be if people knew their journalists? Especially in this era of fake news where people are getting a lot of information from social media, they don't necessarily know who's writing their story, what organization they work for, where these people are. And a lot of the organizations that are fostering engaged journalism today are finding ways of doing this, of opening their doors to the public and turning news spaces, newspaper offices and things like this into kind of community centers, or inviting the public to come to story meetings to find out how the news is socially constructed, right? News doesn't fall from the sky. It's not like Athena who springs fully formed from, the mind of Zeus, but it's people making decisions every day who have agency. They work within this corporate commercial structure, but they're making decisions and doing their best, and in most cases, they have these terrific motives. One of the things that frustrates me about the conversation about fake news and people not having trust in the press is that they ascribe these really sinister motives to journalists, that they're trying to manipulate the public and push their political points of view and make money. But if you guys are working journalists or journalism students, you know that that's not why you're in this business. You want to make the world a better place. You want to shine light on things and help people understand the way the world works. You're not just this cog in a machine, hopefully. So other things that have helped slow food get to the point that it has are community-supported agriculture, that people are investing directly in farmers in their communities. They know who they are and what they're doing, and they make a financial commitment to supporting them. Part of it is product labeling, that every time you go into a grocery store and you look at an apple, you know that this apple costs more than that apple because it has a sticker on it that says organic, and you understand what organic means, and you might pay more for this apple because it comes from down the road than an apple that comes from 1,000 miles away, and you know that you're supporting that local farmer. But there has to be some system of letting you know the provenance of your food, and there also has to be some education that you know why it matters that the apple comes from nearby and not far away. Another idea that I really love of Petrini's is this slogan that he has, that good, clean, fair, that gives an ethical framework for the food system as well as the news system. That most of us think about the quality of news, but that beyond that, there's also an ethical system happening there, not only democracy that we talk a lot about, but fair trade, right? What are the working conditions of journalists? How are they being compensated? Do they have a stable income? We think about fair trade for the people who, grow our coffee or make our chocolate, but what about the people who are giving us information that we make, political decisions on that are going to affect our daily lives too? And the third component then is clean. How is journalism or news or the thing that you're producing contributing to keeping the environment clean and not doing harm to nature or human beings or other living things. And then finally, I'm interested in talking a little bit about this with Alberto as well as with the rest of you afterwards, is the idea of co-production in slow food, which is a lot different from the way that we think about it in journalism. One of the things that's really exciting now in the news business is that people are talking about participation and about collaboration in their communities. But the way slow food thinks of co-production is a lot different from what journalists have tended to do, that for us in journalism for a long time, co-production has been seen as people helping us make the news. And a cynical version of that is maybe user-generated content that, well, this is a way for a news organization to get free content that they don't have to pay for by having people just send us photos or whatever. Or that we're engaging people in deciding what news to cover or how, like if you think about civic journalism or projects like Hearken, which I just learned about, which is really neat, where people work with journalists to explore things that they have questions about and kind of decide what journalism is going to cover. However, in slow food, co-production means more of the demand side. Like, I'm helping you produce the news or this apple by buying this apple. Every time I go to the store, I buy your apple and not somebody else's apple, so that it's creating demand and financial support for the media. So thinking about business models for slow news that might lead to a rosy future for it, subscriptions, advertising, philanthropy, a lot of the typical sources. Crowdfunding, we've had some terrific successes with The Correspondent and with Tortoise just in the past year, that there are a lot of people who are willing to put money into new ventures like this because, we realize the need for it and people are willing to pay for it to launch these projects, but then the question of how to sustain them is gonna come up. And that's where things like membership models or alternative distribution networks, sort of CSAs and things like that might come into play. And at the end of the day, to make all of these things happen, we need consumer education. A lot of conversations this week are just about what news is and what journalism is for and who is a journalist and maybe not a journalist, as well as getting audience invested and in being more transparent. Again, about the values that we espouse, and it's more than just democracy. There's all of these different layers to it. Like when we talk about democracy, being more specific about how we're contributing to it. So just a couple more thoughts here, and then Alberto and I will talk a little bit and hopefully get you guys involved in the conversation too. I like to think about news as lettuce and try to make some direct comparisons here. But also with the understanding that news is not lettuce, obviously. It's an interesting metaphor, it's a neat framework to think with, but at the end of the day, news is not the same as food, it's not perishable. We can talk about whether it's nutritional or healthy versus junk news. But it can travel over long distances, which food can't. News is not necessary for our physical survival like lettuce is. So there are some limitations to this. Although I do, like I said, I do think this is a really interesting framework to kind of take a new perspective on what we're doing and a lot of the assumptions that we make. Some questions that I have for you, again, we're gonna have a little Q&A, but I have just as many questions, probably more questions than I have answers. It's probably true of Alberto as well. What are the advantages and drawbacks of a slow identity? A lot of people do these projects, say we are slow, and it's kind of about branding and about marketing and trying to set ourselves apart from all of the fast journalism that people are criticizing out there. But maybe there are some limitations to that. I like it because, again, we can associate ourselves with this slow living movement that has been so successful, and that there's kind of strength in numbers. by taking all of these different things that people are doing and bringing them together under this umbrella of being slow can kind of, help us gain strength from each other. How does slow news develop ethical commitments to sustaining people and the planet? Ultimately, it's more expensive to pay people a living wage when they work as journalists. It's more expensive to do things in a way that's environmentally friendly. Obviously, right now, we kind of have an emergency in the world of journalism, and we have to deal with that, just getting the quality news out there is a big enough battle without thinking about some of these other ethical aspects. What does transparency look like in slow news? A lot of interesting conversations happening about that. And I also want to recommend another book called Engaged Journalism that you might be familiar with by a guy named Jake Batzel, where he talks about a lot of people who are really challenging a lot of the traditional ways of producing news and bringing people and communities into it. And again, not in a cynical way. It's not just about developing communities as markets through engagement in order to try to boost our readership or our clicks, but really caring about communities and being equal collaborators with them. Is voluntary labeling desirable, practical, effective? If there were a stamp that you could put on your website or your newspaper that sort of communicated what you stand for, would that be helpful to journalists or to readers maybe more so? When you walk into a store and you're buying your apples, you know exactly what those apples are, whereas in news, that's not necessarily the case. But again, this raises problems, who's going to rate these things? Who's going to decide what the criteria are and how they're measured and how they're applied? On the other hand, you can think, if there are organizations that are trying to treat their journalists fairly and pay everybody and not rely on interns and, taking all of these steps in the right direction, maybe they deserve some recognition for it. Maybe they deserve to brag a little bit. And then finally, what kind of institutions can support this kind of work, or what kind of champions could promote it? One of the reasons that Slow Food has done so well is that it has built institutions that have spread the word. It has published guidebooks to get the word out there. It has Carlo Petrini and other sort of vocal, photogenic, appealing people who can make the case to the public. Alberto, maybe you can be the Carlo Petrini of the slow news movement. Maybe not. But again, these are some of the things that I spill out in the book. I talk about a lot more than just slow news and slow journalism. But this is, one of the most pressing issues of our time that I'd like us to dig into a little bit here today. Yeah. So, that's my piece. Alberto, do you want to jump in here and tell us a little bit about where you
I have a
from?
question, but
Okay.
at first I have to say that it's funny because when I've read Jennifer's book and when I'm listening you when you're talking, I find you so clear and simple, and I completely agree. And yesterday we talked about this panel, and I told her maybe I can pretend to be against this slow news concept, but I can't because I completely agree. And I'm wondering why we are not simply doing this kind of journalism. And since I'm trying to put in practice this theory since 5 years, more or less, I know all the objections which come from the mainstream newspapers and so on. And so my question is, how does the mainstream journalistic ecosystem in the US deal with your book? Did they talk about your ideas? Did they find your ideas nice but too hipster or utopistic?
Yeah, idealistic is a word that's used a lot. But the situation that we're in, you have to be pragmatic to a certain extent, but you also have to be guided by ideals, and you have to have big dreams if you're going to try to make change in the world. You have to be inspired. So, why be limited by just making small tweaks to a system that is flawed when maybe we need a new system. Maybe we need to think a little bit bigger and get people inspired to pursue some meaningful change. I mean, and we're kind of at a point now where a lot of things are in crisis. We look at what's happening in our political system. We look at what's happening with our climate. There's Naomi Klein talks about this, and a lot of other people, that we're at this critical moment in our history and society and culture where, change seems possible because things can't stay the way that they are.
Yeah. I've met the correspondent editor-in-chief, and he told me and my crew, since we are shooting a documentary movie about this journalistic movement, he told me this sentence. We, as journalists, have talked about what's the weather like for 150 years, and maybe we should have talked about the climate that is changing. And I think that it's perfect because everybody from the mainstream journalism say, okay, this is fine, slow journalism, yes, but we need also the rest of the stuff. And I ask, which kind of stuff? I mean, you asked before, what is a news?
Yeah.
Is it a funny video? Is it clickbaiting news? Is it a politician tweet on Twitter? I don't think so. So maybe, I don't know, maybe we have in some way misunderstood what does it mean to be a journalist today, or maybe even in the past. But do you think that this kind of approach has to do with overproduction and not with the peace of journalism? Maybe we product too much.
No, that's absolutely true, that people feel overwhelmed and overloaded with news. Yeah, and I mean, for a journalism professor, I find it kind of interesting that obviously I'm a news junkie, but I also sort of try to keep a critical distance from the news and not follow breaking news. One of the reasons I love delayed gratification is that it comes every 3 months and it's 120 pages, no ads. It essentially tells me everything that I need to know that's happened in the past 3 months, or the previous quarter. That it gives you this sort of well-curated version of important and interesting things that have happened. That I feel like I know enough about what's happening in the world from reading just this one publication that I don't have to be glued to my screen all day long.
I have a lot of questions for Jennifer, but I prefer to ask if you want to say something, want to participate to this panel. Nobody.
Well, I have questions for you too.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
So Alberto has written this book, but he's also making a documentary about the slow news movement. And I haven't had a chance to talk with you about this, that I'm interested in hearing more about what the state of that project is and some of the things that you're trying to do with it.
We are working on this project very slowly, of course, since it's difficult to fund it.
Yeah.
So we wrote it 4 years ago, and we are still shooting, and we will hopefully end the shooting part in June, and then we hope to find the founder to finish the editing part by the end of the fall. And it's very interesting because we are collecting a lot of international journalists which are already doing this kind of journalism. And they don't think that it's something hipster or utopistic, but because they are doing it. You have told about Zetland. I don't know if there is someone from Zetland here because I've seen them, but they are a little startup, and they was able to manage something like 18,000 subscribers. They prefer to call them members and not subscribers, which are paying for their journalism, and they produce only 2 or 3 articles in a day. And sometimes people tell them, it's too much. Please make the I know that it seems to be funny, but do you really manage to read an entire newspaper in a day? not in Italy, I think, because we have a 72 pages newspaper, and sometimes,
really?
yeah, of course, we have this kind of newspaper. Maybe you don't know that in Italy you can find newspaper with the rumors and gossips and sex scandals, but also international politics analysis and so on. Okay, so I have another question for you. Do you think that this slow theory has something to do with technology or not?
That's a good question. It does have a lot to do with technology, and it's not. A lot of people have liked to characterize it as being against technology. I mean, one of the things that I did as part of this project, towards the beginning of it, was I had an experiment where I spent 6 months without the internet or any digital media, partly just as a challenge to myself, that, I reached the point where I felt like I was spending all of my time looking at screens and reading reviews, but not actually experiencing things anymore, not being out in the world, talking to people and doing things firsthand, which was one of the reasons that I became a journalist in the first place, right? To explore the world, not to sit behind a desk tapping away at Google all day long. And so part of it was just for the challenge, that I started telling people, yeah, I think I'm going to do something where I get rid of the internet and just don't use it for 6 months. And people said, oh, that's a terrible idea. You could never do that, and why would you want to? Whereas other people said, that's a great idea. I would love to do that, but it's just not possible. Nobody can live without the internet. But at the end of the day, you can. You can live without information. You can live without news. It's not necessary for your survival. There are other ways of being informed without digital media that people have used for, decades and centuries and millennia before, 1993, when we all started getting personal computers. And so for me, part of it was, I feel privileged, and that as a digital immigrant, so to speak, I had this experience of the pre-digital world that I can contrast with the world that we live in now, and sort of appreciate the richness of both of them. I almost feel like it's being intercultural in a way. It's almost, when I did my experiment of not using digital media, I almost felt like I was traveling in a foreign country, just living in New York City, using the city differently and seeing things differently, that, now suddenly I'm picking up that free alternative news weekly on the corner that, is invisible to everybody else now that they have their smartphones. I got used to using payphones because I didn't have a phone in my pocket anymore. And I would walk through the city and people would say, I would ask where a payphone was, and they would say, oh, I don't know, there aren't any payphones around here. And there would be one 10 feet away behind them. It's just, you don't see things anymore because they don't seem relevant to your life. Another story is, I went to a wine store and I said, oh, what are the wine specials of the week? And the woman who worked at the store went to her computer and she tried to print out the flyer, and her printer wasn't working. And I turned and looked, and there's a shelf of all of the wine specials of the week right next to us. Like, there's a world right in front of us, the three-dimensional worlds that, we can just open our eyes and look at. So it was really enlightening in that way. The other aspect of it was, I let myself use the internet for 1 hour a month, and I just rationed it very carefully.
And you are still alive.
Huh?
You are still alive.
I'm still alive, yeah. And I was kind of interested to see, like, if I only get to use the internet for 1 hour, what do I use it for, What is it worth spending that hour on? Which, isn't that different than when the internet started? Some of you are probably old enough that you remember having to pay for the minute by your internet connection. If we had to pay by the minute for our internet connections, or by the search, which was also an early model that they imagined, before Google came along, that you would submit a search and a person would would do the research for you manually and return the information to you and charge you a quarter, How much would you use Google if you had to pay a quarter for every search that you did? You'd think a little bit harder about what you're looking for. And so, for me, I actually had a timer next to my computer, And when I would go on the internet, I would like have a game plan, like, okay, I'm gonna look at this, this, and this. You know, you don't click on any of the ads. You don't just sort of surf your time away. And I would mark down, you know, okay, I used 15 minutes, so I have 45 minutes. I always used up my hour every month, right, of course. I was always glad to get my new hour on the first of the next month. But it was just about having a little bit more critical distance and not taking it for granted and realizing what you really need the internet for. And the list of things is pretty short. If you're not afraid to find a payphone, or I had a couple kind of emergency situations where I asked people with cell phones to make a call for me, but only a few times. Banking issues, you know? Financial situations and work-related. You know, now, but again, this is 9 years ago, and the only reason I could do it is because I'm a professor and I was on sabbatical, and I did this as, you know, a research project. But how many of you today could put away your phone for, I mean, certainly not 6 months or a month, maybe a week, without there being serious repercussions for your career, your parents? I mean, depending on who you are and like what your life situation is, you know, we have parents or children that we need to be in touch with several times a day. We have payroll sheets that we have to submit online. There are some places where you need an app to pay for parking. You can't just put money in a meter anymore. You have to have a phone, and you have to download an app in order to, you know, leave your car someplace for an hour. Yeah. So we've become a lot more dependent on the internet now than we used to be. That, you know, I probably couldn't do that experiment again without there being a lot of cultural changes going on that I don't anticipate happening anytime soon. But it was fun. It really opened my eyes that, you know, I enjoyed life. I went places in person. I spent time at the park and in the museum. And as a teacher, I've also required my students to do this as an experiment too, that it teaches you to tap into your inner resources a little bit more, to plan your time and to think ahead of time of what information you're going to need to get through the day. I found that when I would assign my students to not use their phones or computers for a day, in a lot of cases it just set up this void. Like suddenly there's this vacuum of empty time and they don't know what to do with it. And they would be constantly worried that people needed to get in touch with them. So, you know, it involves some planning that you have to warn people, I'm not going to be on the internet tomorrow. I'm not going to have my phone, Mom. So if I don't answer the call, it's okay. I'm just doing a project for class. And that you have to, you have to create a positive instead of thinking of it as a negative. And that's one of the things that I did was I started out talking about digital detox and unplugging, and that's all these negatives, like what you can't do. You know, and it makes you focus on what you can't do instead of seeing it as an opportunity and kind of having a positive narrative, like not I can't use the internet today, I can't be on Facebook today, but today is a day where I can do all of these other things and go places with my friends. And my students started, you know, instead of complaining about like, oh, I hated digital detox, there was nothing to do, I was so bored, I cleaned my room, I was so bored, there was nothing else. When I started saying, hey, this is going to be a slow media day, so instead of using your computer, you can make art, you can play music, you can go to the museum, you can go to the park, walk in the woods, play sports. And suddenly they would write these journals, and, you know, it was kind of like these college students had lost their childhoods in a way to the internet. And I felt that way too. Like, you know, sometimes I feel like, oh, I'm just going to go online, check my email, and like hours go by, and I think, God, where did my day go? What am I doing with my life? And a lot of 19-year-olds actually feel the same way. You know, they feel like, you know, when I was a kid, I used to have all these hobbies. I used to, you know, take piano lessons, and I used to play the trumpet or whatever. I used to keep a diary. And now they don't do it anymore. They just sit and kind of, you know, stare at screens. So it's about being a Renaissance person. It's about, you know, using different parts of your brain, and almost, you know, being bilingual or multilingual in a way that You can enjoy the richness of life.
Yeah. And just to support the idea that this is not something against technology.
Yeah.
We should remember that also paper is a technology.
Right.
And that paper can be very fast, okay? So you can be fast when you are using paper. So it depends on what you are doing. You can be a slow journalist and cover emergency situation. You can be slow as a method of working and on preparing your articles or checking user-generated content and so on. And then I found very, very interesting to try to put in practice this theory, asking people which are working as journalists, please send me your proposal and we can publish them, since fortunately our little slow news in Italy is sustainable right now. We have a few amount of subscribers, but we can manage it because we don't have a physical building, we don't own it, we don't have to pay for it. So we are just four and we can work with this kind of journalism. Yeah. And the fact I found very, very fun is that even journalists are not prepared to this kind of proposal. The question they make me are something like, do you want a picture? Which is the title? How long the article should be? And my answers are I don't want a title, I want a story. I want the best story that you can tell my readers, and I don't know how much you have to write. I don't want it to be prepared tomorrow. I want it to publish when it's ready to be published. And they are amazed because since they are so involved in these 24/7 news cycles, they are not prepared to this. They are prepared only to newsrooms which are asking for, okay, not more than 2,000 characters for this news, and the title should be this one. And so you can never be focused on what you're writing, but you have to be focused on what you are, how much you are writing. Yeah. And it's crazy because we can do it with the digital, and we have no limits. So an article can be 3,000 characters or 16,000 characters. It depends on what are you talking about. But they are not prepared.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very strange. And sometimes there are journalists which are sending us proposals, and they say we can make also videos. And I say yes, but I don't care. Why? Can you make a video in a professional way? No, I'm just a journalist, but I have the smartphone. Okay, so please don't make videos for us. Just write, just find the story. And again, a lot of people, in this book, in the Slow Journalism Italian book, you can find also some interview. We interviewed also Mario Calabresi, the former editor-in-chief of Repubblica, and he told me, maybe you can talk about this kind of the correspondent and Zetland experiments, because there is the other part, because there is the mainstream. So it seems to me that we always try to define the slow journalism movement against something else. But you have provided us with a positive definition. And it's not only based on we have to do our work as we always have done it, because the good, clean, and fair definition is perfect. And it's something new for journalism. Yeah. Even in Italy, where we have a law that can allow journalists not to reveal their sources, to protect the sources. And in practice, we translated it, we don't write the sources at all, which is crazy because I have to provide you the sources. Yeah.
One other myth I can point out too is that a lot of people think that this is about nostalgia. That
we have a question.
Oh,
okay.
Yes.
So please finish and we can prepare the microphone.
Microphone?
We have.
Yeah. First, I'm very impressed by your work because, trying to go against the wave, and we've been so much conditioned to think of our life and world online and pushed to go online from dating to ordering to studying also online and trying to think our world offline is kind of today like you need to think back and it doesn't speak to everyone and that there is another world that is not online, and I'm wondering how much is it pushed by corporations by trying to get new customers or new market online that is like without borders. That through a website you can like find other markets and customers, and how much like can we educate maybe also like young people or how to define and build their lives also offline and not like to log themselves like as we like try to be now like through our mobile phone. I'm checking my mobile every 2 minutes and I've never talked to my mother as much as since she discovered a free unlimited call on Facebook.
Yes.
So that allow us to communicate, but like how much like are we losing from a real life experience? I will never remember like, oh, I had a great conversation, a great time yesterday on WhatsApp or on Facebook, but I will remember I had like a nice coffee or a nice chat with someone I met like even randomly. And your book is slow media. I'm not even sure that it's slow. It's just like human times, like it's normal times. Is it really being slow when you take your time to do things that you need time to do if you want to do it in a meaningful way?
Yeah, it's a meaningful counterpoint. It's not that, slow is good, fast is bad, but actually that we enjoy speed more by slowing down. If we went fast all the time, we wouldn't even be conscious of going fast. It's the slowness, it's kind of like the yin and the yang, right? Is one way to think about it. So that I feel like I appreciate and enjoy digital and going fast by, taking some time away from it. Another myth is that it's about, the hipster sort of nostalgic people, middle-aged people who miss records of their childhood, right? But that's not true either. That, a lot of the people who are interested in buying records today are young people who are enjoying this like new experience of having this physical object and listening to a whole album, and sort of appreciating the physical artwork of a thing as well as the sound quality. Or zines are having a big comeback. That you would think that people who grew up with a cell phone in their pocket would only want to publish online and blogs, but that's not true. That they enjoy making things by hand and learning letterpress printing. Another myth is that these things are expensive when in fact they're not. That you can buy a lot of old media in thrift stores. You can read a book for free from the library. That there are a lot of different sources for tapping into and experimenting with these things. And I mean, to talk about young people too, I mean, just specifically with journalism is that, I have had so much interest from young people who are excited about slow news and slow journalism, who really want to, pursue careers in this. And it's not generational.
No.
It sort of cuts across.
It's literally not.
Yeah.
And you can have, we have a question, but I have to add this. You can have a proof of what I mean when I talk about overproduction, since we are here in this wonderful festival and you have 10 other events at the same time at 3 o'clock, and then people are running away because they are going to another event and they have to see it, and they are telling me you have 10 minutes more.
Yeah.
And for me, we are at the pitch of our idea. We have just started. So this is the reason why I tell you, if you want, we can have a coffee and talk about this. Please,
And
the question.
I also want to thank everybody for being here when I know it's beautiful outside. We've been waiting for the sun for days, and it's finally here.
So thank you for the interesting panel, and thank you for the floor. You have spoken about slow food, but it is actually quite expensive. A lot of people can't afford it. Do you think it will be the destiny also of slow journalism?
This is the question.
Yeah.
How can we make slow food and slow media more democratic? That there are a lot of people who would like to. I know people who value organic milk, but they say, "Gee, it's $1 more. I just can't afford to buy the organic version of things." In some cases, scaling up does help. That, you know, keeping things small will make it more expensive. It might make it a little bit purer. You know, in the United States now, we have organic food that's being sold at Walmart. You know, that the idea is there's enough of it that the prices come down and it becomes more accessible to people. Slow media, the challenge at the end of the day is that you do need to pay for things that you're not used to paying for. You know, so the apple comparison isn't the same. It's like, you know, a beautiful organic local apple versus a shiny free apple. You know, it's not really, well, comparing apples to apples. But news, you know, we're talking about paid news versus free news, not paid news versus slightly cheaper news.
Yeah.
So there's a big difference. One thing that I'm a big fan of is the slow media budget that I've started promoting, with the idea that, you know, take some small piece of your budget and decide what you value and that you're going to pick a few things to support.
Yeah.
So, you know, maybe you're not ready to pay for everything that you would like to, but pick a few things that improve the value of your life and hopefully, you know, the value of your brain, your information, and put some money behind that. Yeah. In the United States, you know, people used to spend $100 a month on cable TV. I don't know what it costs here in Europe. And a lot of people have stopped subscribing to cable TV, but you can think, you know, you used to give $100 a month to that media service. What if you take that same $100 and apply it to good quality news, you know, subscribing to a magazine or a newsletter, or, you know, paying for a documentary film? That, you know, if you value things, you have to put a little money behind it. And right now, that's not always accessible to everybody, especially not to students. But hopefully, we can find ways to address that problem as we go.
Yeah, maybe we should work on clarifying people that why they need journalism. But before doing this, we should stop to produce not journalism. And the second point is that, for example, the correspondent and we in Italy too, we are trying to work on a business model based on the pay how much as you can model. So we say, okay, this is our journalistic product. We think that you should pay at least 100 euros a year. But we know that our journalism is valuable and it's important for you. And so if you can't afford this expense, maybe someone else can pay a little bit more. It is another way to try to find the way to make this sustainable. I am definitely and radically convinced that in this period, the advertising business model and journalism should have definitely detached, because you can never understand if there is an advertiser which is paying for journalism, what does the advertiser want from you? Are you free to speak about him or not?
Yeah, exactly.
So we can, we have to go fast. We have 3 minutes.
Yeah, so just 1 minute. There are a lot of interesting ideas now that people have been floating and trying to pursue, including things like government subsidies.
Yeah.
You know, in the United States, there are some governments that will give you a tax credit if you donate money to a certain cause. Sometimes it's a political cause or nonprofits or what have you. You know, what if we gave every American $100 a year to spend on the journalism of their choice? You know, there would be some decisions you have to make in, like, who qualifies to receive that subsidy, what is journalism, right? But it's worthy of discussion. You know, we need to find new ways of paying for journalism because the advertising model isn't working anymore. Or another is people have started talking about a digital media tax, you know? Like, there are certain companies that are making a ton of money in the digital media environment that's actually undermining real journalism. Well, what if they just offset a little of that to, you know, help us keep living in a world of, you know, free information and democracy? It might be a worthy trade-off.
We have time for another question.
Yeah.
maybe, very quick.
Uno minuto.
So I think you've made a good case for like how this could improve like the lives of journalists and the lives of consumers, but what does it do in terms of creating better journalism?
Well, I mean, one example is being able to take the time to cover a story thoroughly and not just chasing the same thing that everybody else is chasing, you know. The earthquake in Aquila, and everybody goes there and talks about it for a week, and then they all disappear. Because they feel like there's, you know, this, it's trending on Twitter, so we have to chase after that story and get a piece of the public interest. And then tomorrow something else, and then next week something else. You know, what if we were not chasing the clicks and free to pursue stories that were important?
And listen to people which are paying and reading your stories, and asking them, what do you want from us?
Listening takes time.
And you will discover that they won't never say, oh, please give us more humors and sex scandals and gossips and so on.
Yeah.
They will ask you, give us more journalism. So this is another possibility to listen to people. Okay. I think that we have finished. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I suggest you to buy Slow Media. You can find also in the Kindle version. So we are not against technology at all.
No,
And if you want the Italian brother, it's over there in the corner. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We need to empty the room now, so then you can come back, but now you have to get off.